My son, the Great Spirit has seen fit that we should die together, and he has sent you here. It is in his will. Let us submit. It is best. That was Chief Cornstalk. We're going to talk about Cornstalk's War. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. Well, I bet you can kind of see where this one's going to end a mile away, huh? Welcome back to History Goon. My name's Kevin, and this is an episode that I didn't really intend on doing, but it leads into something that I want to do next week, because I've already done a lot of research, previously for the topic of next week's episode, just out of general curiosity, because it's one of those things that I've been fascinated with forever. I can't tell you what it is. You have to wait. Some of you will know exactly where I'm going as soon as you hear certain town names here. But, it's just, there was little snippets in the research for the other thing about this, and I was like, why not just dive into that and see what it's actually all about? So let's get into it. Cornstalk was born maybe between 1720 and 1727 into the Shawnee tribe of Virginia. It would be modern-day West Virginia now. And his given name was, oh God, I'm going to butcher this, Hokolaweska, meaning a blade of corn. Cornstalk makes total sense. From the time of his birth up until around 1764, there's really nothing to talk about, unfortunately. Records are very spotty and whatnot, like pre-American Revolution, and, with the Shawnee people not having a written language, they didn't keep track of who was doing what. And that's not me being a scumbag and be like, oh, the Indians didn't have a written language. The Shawnee literally had no written language. That's why there's no records of any of this stuff. It was all passed down verbally, like oral tradition and stuff like that. They have tons of that. They did not have a written language. Therefore, again, no records. Just to jump back slightly, and only because it's pretty important, the Shawnee were driven out of Ohio by the Iroquois in the 1680s. Well before Cornstalk was born. The Shawnee tribe is scattered into Pennsylvania, the Wyoming Valley, which is modern-day Wilkes-Barre, the Susquehanna Valley areas. So basically eastern Pennsylvania, in generalized as an area, eastern Pennsylvania. The leader of Cornstalk's band, the Makoche, was a man named Paxinosa, who was either, they don't really know, but he was either Cornstalk's father or grandfather. So sticking with Paxinosa for a minute, in 1755, when the French and Indian War hit Pennsylvania, he kept his band neutral and out of the fighting, which was something that gave him some credit for, because it seemed like everybody at this point was getting in on the fighting for one reason or another, whether it was pushing back against expansion, being paid to fight, or finding out that a rival tribe is fighting on the opposite side, and now it's time to get some licks in on them while you can, because they're fighting already, so you may as well join up and fight against them. During all of this, he actually brought his people back to the Ohio Territory and set up a town and offered shelter for other Shawnee refugees from the war. Some of the Shawnee bands didn't take part in the fighting, but any that wanted to get out of the war were welcomed into the new town, no questions asked. Welcome home, basically. So jumping back to Cornstalk, there's a pretty good chance that he fought in Pontiac's War, which I don't want to go too much into because I really want to deep dive that one in the future because it's really interesting. But we really don't know for sure. Again, with no written language, hard to keep track of that. Between the events of Pontiac's War and the next thing that we're going to get into, he had a couple of sons, one named Kudamoya, which translates into the wolf, and Alanawisika. So one gets a super badass name, and the other one sounds like a South American drug that helps you see your spirit animal and whatever else is, like robots and stuff in the jungle. I don't do drugs, so I couldn't tell you. Other than the ones that, they're not really drugs. They don't count. So just when you thought maybe just one time on this show we'll get out of a story without interference from the Anglo-Mongolian Empire, aka the British, you're sorely mistaken. They issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which set up a border between the savages to the east and the natives to the west. I don't know if you saw what I did there. I'm making the British the bad guys. Why not? This also prevented white settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. It also created boundaries for 4 new colonies, Quebec, East Florida, West Florida, and Grenada. Those places are nowhere near Pennsylvania or the Appalachian Mountains. The closest one is Quebec, and that's still like a sizable difference, like distance from any of the rest of them. It also set terms for the governments and all that red tape and for each one of the new colonies. Anyway, 1768, there's a new treaty signed. This is the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Sir William Johnson, I assume he's probably British. He was also the supervisor for, he was the Indian supervisor at Fort Pitt, which is now Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. He made a deal with the Iroquois, which gave land somewhere in the tune of 27 million acres for the equivalent of what would be about $2.6 million today, south of the Ohio River, which is like modern-day West Virginia and Kentucky. The English just acquired 27 million acres of land for nothing, basically. The new boundary line ran from Fort Stanwix, which is in modern-day Rome, New York, which is like western New York. Like, I don't think it's out quite towards Buffalo, but it's like the western half of New York. And it ran all the way down south to where Paducah, Kentucky is now. The problem here is that the land that's been given over to the English by the Iroquois is land that the Shawnee had been on for hundreds of years. This included like not just hunting there or, traveling through there. They lived there. And guess who had zero involvement or any say in this treaty? The Shawnee got completely hosed. A letter then hits the desk of John Murray, who is the Earl of Dunmore. It's addressed to him in the General Assembly, and the author was only identified as, quote, a virgin. Nerd. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. A Virginian. Milord. It literally started with Milord, so this is going to be old-timey British nonsense. Milord, though I know it's an established maxim more time. Though I know it's an established maxim with your leadership that as you are ever open to personal access to take but little notice or addresses communicated to you through the channel of a common newspaper, yet I dare hope that should some chance direct your lordship's eye to this letter, it will engage your closest attention. One more time. I do not mean to spread abroad causeless apprehensions or aggravate reports that have already been disseminated through the country, but it is my intention to give you information founded on undoubted veracity, and then leave it to your lordship's wisdom to determine what is most expedient to be done. Doubt it not then, my lord, when I assure you from testimony fiercely to be invalidated? I hate the English. I assure you from testimony fiercely to be invalidated that the situation of the frontier countries of the colony is of most alarming nature. A situation so truly crucial as to require the instant assistance of both the executive and legislative powers. Our treacherous and clandestine foes, the Indians have greedily embraced all opportunities of manifesting their, I don't know what this word is, but I'm assuming it means unfriendly, affections towards us, but some recent transactions of theirs, with which, if report speaks the language of truth, your lordship has already been made acquainted, leaves us no room to doubt that the storm which has been so long gathering will ere long break forth in all of its fury. And should this ill-fated event take place while the inhabitants of the confines of the colony remain in their present undisciplined, distressed situation, and that my lord must apologize for the freedom which an obscure individual has assumed with your lordship, should you suppose any apology on that score necessary? 10,000 incidents conspire to render a war at this time necessary, nay, inevitable, and the innocent lives of numbers might be saved by the timely proclamation of it. The very smiles of those faithless tribes ought to be considered as the harbingers of perfidy, but when they dare openly to annoy us with acts of hostility, surely a more solid resentment is due. Should an instant of any hostile acts of theirs be demanded, I need only mention the unhappy murder of young Russell, committed not too long ago, and as has since been ascertained, was perpetrated by a Cherokee chief. Makes sense, because, you're going to go fight the Shawnee instead of the Cherokee who did this. Anyway, numberless other examples of hostility, equally atrocious, might be adduced were it not hoped that this of itself is sufficient. Whether it would be prudent to wait for a second stroke, let the provident determine. The spring, it seems, is the slated period for an invasion, and in all probability the attack will be earlier on the most remote inhabitants. The month of May is the time appointed by the convention of the assembly, so that it is more probable to suppose those barbarians will be scattering havoc and desolation around, while our House of Burgesses are spending much time in debating in which manner to prohibit such outrages. By convening them a month or two sooner, what mischief might not be prevented. You have now in your power, my lord, to render the name of Dunmore as memorable in Virginia as that of Marlborough is in Great Britain. Do not let slip the golden opportunity. Oh my God, I'm so glad that part is over. That guy wrote so much and said so little, and it made me angry to have to read that. Little behind the scenes. That little section there that I stumbled through that made it sound like I don't know how to read, which I do know how to read, that took me like 10 minutes to get through because there was just so much stupid language in there that didn't need to be there. And this guy was just stirring the pot, trying to start a war. Could have just said that. But he didn't. He decided to be British. Anyway. Dunmore took this super seriously and sent a couple columns down the Ohio River from Fort Pitt towards the Shawnee villages around Chillicothe, which I believe is in Ohio. The second column traveled down the Kanawha River towards where it dumps off into the Ohio River at what is now Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Cornstalk wasn't really much for picking fights. He was more in favor of peace. He took that from his predecessor where we don't need to go to war unless we have to go to war. There's no need to start something that we don't need to start. It's more a defensive mindset than anything. So that being said, now wasn't really the time for peace. The strongest military on the planet is marching towards his people. On March 30th, Daniel and Jacob Greathouse and their crew came across a trading post at Baker's Bottom. There they come across a group of Mingo Indians that had crossed the river from where their hunting camp was, which is over by the Yellow Creek. These guys weren't really doing anything other than, being Indians. And for that, the British killed 13 of them unprovoked. A Mingo leader that the whites called Logan took 40 men on a raiding party, hitting colonist settlements after that. This was a good enough reason for Cornstalk to hit the warpath as well. They destroyed farms. They killed and scalped settlers. They took people captive. Fun fact, if you didn't know this about scalping, it doesn't necessarily always kill the victim. If you're not familiar with the process of scalping, you'd basically be rendered incapacitated in some fashion, like if you got like bonked with a club or something. And they would carve a circle like from the front of your hairline all the way around your head at the top with a knife or whatever, and they would start to pull on your hair. They'd pull on your hair, and as it's pulling up, they're also using the knife and they're kind of still cutting away at it. I couldn't imagine the sound in your own head of what that would sound like, because it'd be like wet, tearing. Ugh. And this is coming from a guy who has filed down one of his own teeth. That was a unpleasant enough sound, but I couldn't imagine just like the wet, like sucking sound of your scalp being ripped off. No, I'm good. Pretty often, if you survived, the wound would heal over. And the worst part is, yeah, it healed over, but the hair doesn't grow back. So in some native communities, if you were like a warrior or somebody that was scalped by another tribe and it healed over, people would be horrified of you. Because yeah, you survived it, you know, but you also look like a monster now because you've just got this giant fucking like shiny patch of scar tissue on the top of your head and no hair except for like what grows around the sides. Yeah, so you look like a monster, basically, if you survived it. After the native counterattacks, Dunmore ordered 2 more forts to be built to defend the area of the border. In late July, 400 militiamen led by Major Angus MacDonald raided into Shawnee territory and villages. They also came across some Lenape villages on the way, but they left them alone since they were peaceful. There's more likely than not a different reason that they didn't attack the Lenape, and we'll get into that as we go. Because, yeah, the Shawnee were peaceful too. But just like the Mingos that got smoked not too long ago, you know, the Lenape were just like, whatever, we're not really doing anything. The series of raids worked out, but at the same time didn't stop the natives from raiding back. So to try to do that, Dunmore comes up with a plan to end this whole thing by sending 2 divisions of militia into Chillicothe, whatever it is, which is the main town occupied by the Shawnee. Dunmore himself would lead this whole little shindig as they're headed down the road. Somewhere around 1,400 men marched towards Chillicothe, 500 under Major William Crawford from Redstone to Fort Finn Castle. They went from Redstone to Fort Finn Castle with pack horses, loaded up equipment, and then they head to Pittsburgh, and then they hit the road from there. Because Pittsburgh, as it sets, is like, I don't know, half an hour in a car from the West Virginia border. So you're really not that far to get down over the border. And then from there, you're in Indian country at that point back then. Here's when Cornstalk sent word that he's willing to start peace talks before any of the fighting really starts. But he wants to do it face to face with Dunmore at the mouth of the Hockhocking Creek, which is a weird name. As he sends that word out, another 700 men met up with the initial 500 at Wheeling, West Virginia. Well, what is now Wheeling, West Virginia, on September 30th. And the idea of peace talks kind of went out the window after reports start rolling in about raids along the Monongahela River. These may not even been Cornstalk's guys that were raiding. This could have been completely unrelated to the war that's about to kick off. This could have just been random acts of raiding. You know, this happens. So So the militia built a fortified magazine, which is basically just a building that's designed to store ammunition and explosives. More on that next week. The negotiations between Cornstalk and Dunmore failed spectacularly, and here's where things get ugly. A Delaware chief by the name of White Eyes sent some dudes from his tribe and some Lenape scouts into Shawnee land not to help the Shawnee. They went ahead of the colonial forces and they start sending back information. Hence why the Lenape were probably not touched in the first place as these guys are coming down the creek. Colonel Andrew Lewis showed up at Point Pleasant with 800 men on October 6th. They set up a camp, and a few days later, another 400 men show up with pack horses and supplies. Cornstalk and his very few allies mustered about 800 warriors, not counting the roving raiding parties. The good news is he's got really, really good scouts working on his behalf that are sending back troop movements and troop sizes and stuff like that. Very critical information for a war. His game plan is to hit the smaller forces of Major Lewis at Point Pleasant before all of Dunmore's forces could link up, because if that were to happen, he's going to be outnumbered probably like 3 or 4 to 1. So he wants to hit these guys first, then bounce back to Chillicothe and set up defenses against a division led by another, I believe he was a colonel by the last name of Stevens. This is a fairly solid plan. Hit him hard, hit him fast, kill a bunch of dudes, demoralize the enemy, maybe kill enough of them to make higher ups go, this is a bad idea. We should just go home and mind our business. Cornstalk's boys rode down the Ohio River on rafts, completely undetected, and then they crossed the river and convened at an abandoned village just a couple of miles away from the colonial camp. October 9th, Cornstalk plans to hit this camp at the pre-dawn hours as the white man sleeps. The next day on the 10th, 4 men from the militia were out deer hunting when some of Cornstalk's boys found them, but unfortunately only managed to kill one of them. The other 3 took off and they make it back to camp. Word gets to Colonel Lewis. He sends out 2 separate groups of 150 men in 2 columns to see what kind of threat they're dealing with. And when I say columns, I mean like they are actually traveling in columns, because that's how they fight, where you'd come up and form a line. First row would fire, they'd kneel to reload, second row would fire. Box formations are the stupidest way to do combat. It's right up there with trench warfare as to being ineffective and just an incredibly stupid thing to do. Because anybody that can be convinced that standing shoulder to shoulder with another guy and looking across the field at other guys doing the same thing, 50, 60 yards away, and then just shooting at each other and standing there and waiting to get shot, pretty stupid. Which is why people like Francis Marion during the Revolution were so effective, because he was just kind of a bastard and just he like basically guerrilla warfare consistently. If you've ever seen The Patriot, Mel Gibson's character is loosely based on Francis Marion and somebody else that I can't remember the guy's name. But those were the guys that made being British and on the continent in the 1700s miserable. Then you have the Green Mountain Boys up in my neck of the woods that did a lot of the same stuff. And then we sent an alcoholic in a boat across the lake, and he got all the credit while his brother and another dude went in and nailed a bunch of powdered wigs to the wall in Fort Ticonderoga, but he was like sleeping off a pretty nasty hangover in the boat. But then they named a furniture company after him, and everything else in the state of Vermont is named after Ethan Allen, even though it was Seth Brown and Ira Allen that actually did all the work. Anyway, both of these columns are traveling towards Chillicothe, that general direction, and they get hit within minutes of each other. And they're not like near each other. They're a couple of miles apart, but they get hit at almost the same time. Both of the colonels leading these columns would end up injured. You have William Fleming and Charles Lewis. They're both banged up pretty bad. Lewis actually ends up dying a few hours after the attack. This pissed Andrew Lewis off, our colonel from before that sent these columns out, because the colonel that was killed in this attack is his brother. So things at the moment are going good for Cornstalk. He's got 2 successful hits on the enemy, got a numbers advantage against these 2 particular groups, these columns that they've sent in. Life is good until the remaining captains show up and bring in another 200 reinforcements each. And that now puts us up to about, I want to say it's like right around 1,100 guys ready to fight. But you have all these guys that are at this camp. They send 200 reinforcements down to reinforce these columns. They end up closing the lines and beating off a counterattack by 9 a.m. The fight lasted for another 4 hours until the Virginians took control and forced Cornstalk's men to retreat. This battle essentially lasted from dawn until dusk, and the Virginians now have control of the battlefield. Of the 800 Virginian troops that were sent to this, including the reinforcements, 75 killed, another 140 wounded. We don't have a count on native casualties, but the English did say that they had a lot of respect for these guys. Quote, "The enemy behaved with inconceivable bravery. Never did Indians behave bolder, fully convinced that they would beat us." And that was written by Colonel Fleming, who was banged up in a hospital bed. He wrote that the following day. The following day, Colonel Lewis ordered a march on the Shawnee towns and settlements in the area. Dunmore's spies are reporting back to him that Cornstalk's got about 700 troops and their families all in Chillicothe. Cornstalk has a very important decision to make, and it's very crucial that he make it quickly. Because you can retreat and abandon these towns and villages, get everybody out safely, or you can take on anywhere between 1,100 and 1,400 men that are much better armed and supplied than you. You're getting doubled up, or you can run away. In that 1,100 to 1,400 men range isn't even all of them. That's just what's there now. That number is going to probably double, if not more than that, as soon as the other Colonel Lewis shows up with his men. Here he decides that making peace would probably be the best option. He sends a team of interpreters and a truce flag off to the Virginians. October 19th, Cornstalk accepted the terms that Dunmore offered. First of all, the Shawnee have to give over any captives that they've taken. They also have to give up land on the south bank of the Ohio River and fall back across the Virginia border. I probably should have mentioned this before, but at this point in time, Virginia and West Virginia were all one thing. There was no West Virginia. It was just all Virginia. Once they crossed that border, they would not be allowed to cross the border again for any reason, including hunting. They also were not allowed to, quote, molest any boats passing on the river. I don't know that they would have done that in the first place, especially because Cornstalk is a good leader, and he would much rather be peaceful than violent. So I don't think he would have taken well if any of that had happened. I think that would have been a situation where he would have handled it in-house had he found out, like, hey, somebody's messing with these British boats that are going back and forth. If he'd found out who it was, he probably would have had that situation handled, put it that way. What would become known as Dunmore's War has now come to an end. Cornstalk, again, sticks to the terms. He keeps, he's trying to keep his people peaceful and nonviolent, doing a very good job of all that. When the Revolutionary War kicked off, a lot of these tribes sided with the British to try to force the colonists out of the area. Because the British did this thing during the Revolutionary War where they would make promises to certain groups of people that if you fight for us, your life will be better afterwards. they would do this with Native Americans, where they'd go, okay, if you fight for us, we will give your tribe so much land here or whatever, or access to this. They also did that with slaves, where they'd say, if you fight for us against your masters, we'll free you and we'll do this and that and the other for you. Would they have actually done any of this stuff? Probably not. Realistically, probably not. It's just trying to turn people against who are soon to be the Americans to get them to fight for them. It's the enemy of my enemy thing, except if the Brits had won, they would have backtracked on all this other stuff that they'd said they would have done. I am 100% confident in that. Cornstalk and another chief, this is Red Hawk, who was a chief of one of the Delaware tribes. They go to Fort Randolph, which is at Point Pleasant, in October 1777 to talk to the Americans. They told them that most of the tribes in the area are going to be siding with the British, even though they both want to stay neutral. They don't want to fight. They want peace. But if push came to shove, they said, quote, we will have to go with the stream. Because you can't really... Well, you can, because we've already seen that with what the Lenape did here. Cornstalk and Red Hawk are not the guys that are going to turn their backs on their people to fight in favor of the white man to get screwed for it. They would rather have to deal with other tribes in any kind of situation like that than to have to bend the knee to white guys and be like, we'll help you, but then you're going to like not completely screw us after, right?
You sure about that? You sure about that? You sure about that?
So here's the stupid part. In order to, quote, ensure Shawnee neutrality, Captain Matthew Arbuckle arrested Cornstalk and all of his guys that he brought with them. So this guy shows up, offers an olive branch of peace, and then to make sure that he's peaceful, they arrest him and put him in a prison. Not sure where that makes any sense. It makes no sense to me. Other than, unless they like straight up took what he said as a threat instead of taking it as, we want you guys to know what's going on and to know that we don't want to be involved. But if push comes to shove, we have to get involved. We're going to side with these guys. I think that would be something you could have a little bit of respect for, instead of being a scumbag and arresting him. November 7th, I'm sorry, geez, there's so many sevens. November 10th, 1777, Cornstalk's son, Hokolaweska, shows up at the fort to try to figure out what exactly is going on. And while he's there talking to like American officials and all this, a group of Indians kill a soldier in the area. This is completely unrelated to anything he's doing, or anything that Cornstalk was there doing, or anything that Red Hawk was there to do. All of that is completely unrelated to this killing of a soldier. So, of course, the logical thing to do here is to form an angry mob. Arbuckle did his best to try to be reasonable and try to keep people calm, and it didn't work. The mob stormed the cabin that Cornstalk and the rest of his group were in, including now his son, that they're all being held in, and they killed everyone there, Cornstalk included. But he and his son didn't die quickly. He had time to say a few things. First, to his son, he said, quote, "My son, the Great Spirit has seen fit that we should die together, and he has sent you here. It is his will. Let us submit. It is best." Then, allegedly, said this to one of the soldiers that was part of the mob. Quote, "I refused to join your pale-face enemy with the redcoats." Me too. "I came to the fort as your friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered by my side my young son. For this, may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land. May it be blighted by nature. May it even be blighted in its hopes. May the strength of its people be paralyzed by the stain of our blood. That leads us up into next week's episode. And I hope you guys are into weird stuff, because I don't know if I've ever said this or not, but I'm super into like weird stuff. If you've ever heard it in my previous show that I did, you'll understand where I'm going here. This is supposedly part of the reason, this curse that he laid out here is supposedly part of the reason for one of the most well-known paranormal, supernatural, possibly extraterrestrial situations in American history. And that would all end in a tragedy. When we come back next week, I want to take the opportunity to welcome you to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 1966. With that being said, that's where we're going to drop this episode off. So, thank you for being here. I apologize for having to read that flowery British crap that the guy could have just said it way easier. And they wonder why we spell things differently than them, because we drop a bunch of letters that you don't need in words, like the U in color. Who needs that? And we won. So there, take that. Do what you will with it. I say that with love. I do have a couple of, I know for a fact, a couple of English listeners. As a matter of fact, one of them is the moderator on my Facebook page. So he's one of my very good friends, and we have to, bust each other's balls once in a while. It's all in fun. But anyway, what's also fun is if you go over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month there gets you access to more content than you will know what to do with. I promise. There's so much going on over there. I don't think there's a day that passes where I don't get 5 or 6 notifications on my phone of something going on the Patreon, whether it be Sam and Chase like going live for Never Daily, or Luther announcing that he's getting ready to go record Guestnicity, or my episode's dropping on Monday. Pretty busy. There's a lot of stuff there for $5. $5 is the bare minimum, but there's like other levels you can do above that. If you want to support me directly, I do have a Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/History Goon pod. You can make a donation there. I think the lowest you can go is like $5. You can go all the way up to whatever. I'm not going to beg you for money. If you think that what I'm doing is worth throwing me $5, that's awesome. And I greatly appreciate it. If not, just spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell people you don't like. I don't care. If you don't like them, whatever. Let them listen to my show anyway. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you can. You can join the Facebook page, Facebook, however you get onto there, on your phone probably. History Goon Podcast. Bunch of us over there just doing goofy stuff, posting history memes, and having fun. You're more than welcome. We'd love to see you. I also have an Instagram, which is History Goon Pod. I am in the process of setting up a YouTube page as well, where you'll be able to get all my video episodes. And I might do some extra stuff on there too. I'm not real sure. I don't really know how I'm going to do that yet, because I'm not super familiar with YouTube. Well, I mean, I know how to, I'm on YouTube a lot. I just don't know the logistical half of the rest of it. I've never set up a YouTube page or anything like that. So, it's all a big learning curve and trying to figure out if I want to do anything extra on there or what, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, until next time, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit just like Cornstalk and leave a mark on the world. Thanks.